So in this video, we're covering operations with rational expressions, and there are some things that I want to review very quickly because we're going to need this information for this concept. So remember that a rational number is just the ratio of integers, so basically a fraction with integers on the numerator and denominator. And a rational expression is really just an expression that can be written as the ratio of polynomial expressions. So basically you have a fraction where the numerator and denominator are polynomials. Now, here are some examples of expressions. Of course, the last one is just divided by 1, so really it's 4x squared plus 6x minus 10. Now, the next thing I want to cover is when you're simplifying rational expressions, right? Just like when you're simplifying fractions even, you can factor the numerator, factor the denominator, and you can cancel out common factors that are on the numerator and denominator. That's because essentially you have 4 divided by 4, which is really just 1, so it cancels. That also follows for rational expressions. If you have the numerator factored and the denominator factored, you can cancel out any common factors. Like for example, here we have x plus 3 over x plus 3. Of course, that would divide and be just 1, so it cancels. Now you cannot cancel out terms. This is a very common misconception, right? Let's say I had, for example, here I was thinking, oh, well, x and x can cancel. But that is incorrect. Why? Well, let's look at, for example, 4 minus 1 over 4. Well, if you're thinking about canceling out the 4s, that would mean that this equals -1, when in reality, it equals 3/4. So clearly you could see that that's incorrect. So just remember, you can cancel out factors when things are multiplying together. You can't cancel out a specific term. Now, the other thing that I want to cover is, as a review, is excluded values. Remember that excluded values are any values that cannot be possible. In this case, when we have a fraction, the issue is that if you have a fraction that is a polynomial in the numerator and denominator, there's a potential for being variables in the denominator, which is the problem. The issue is that whatever value that makes the denominator 0 is not possible because you can't divide by 0 in math, right? If I try, for example, if I take, let's say, for example, let me clear this. If I take 5 and I divide it by 0, I get an error, right? You can't divide by 0. So whatever value for the variable would make the denominator 0, that is the excluded value. Or another way to say that is the restriction. There's a restriction there because it cannot be, right? So let's go in and try an example. So we're gonna start with multiplying. Now, all the rules that you had and learned for fraction operations are still all the same. So the process is still the same. We just have expressions instead of just a whole number. So they're asking us to multiply the first and the second element. So we have a set of elements here. All 3 of these elements are just rational expressions. So we're going to take the first expression, which is 55x squared over x minus 5, and we're going to multiply it with the second expression, which is 11x to the power of 4 minus 55x cubed all over 11x cubed plus 44x squared. Now, when you're doing this problem, you might think, well, let's go ahead and multiply things out, right? Numerator times numerator over denominator times denominator. But the easiest way to do this is actually going to be to factor the numerator and denominator as much as possible. That way you can simplify by canceling common factors. So 55 is 5 times 11, and of course, x squared is x times x. From 11x to the 4th power minus 55x cubed, we could factor out a 11 and an x cubed. That leaves us with x minus 5. Of course, this is 3 copies of x multiplied together, but I'll just leave it like that for now. In the denominator, we have the x minus 5 quantity, which is multiplying with 11x cubed minus plus 44x squared. Now from here we can also factor out 11, and we can factor out x squared. That would leave us with x plus 4. Okay, so now everything is factored, right? X minus 5 times 11 times x squared times x plus 4. And then we have the numerator. So let's cancel out any common factors. Well, we have 2 copies of x here, which would cancel out with these 2 copies of x. And we have an 11 that cancels out with this 11. And we have x minus 5, which cancels out with x minus 5. So in the numerator, we end up with 5 times 11 times x cubed, which is 55x cubed. And in the denominator, we just have x plus 4. Now, along with that answer, I need to write my excluded values, right? What can x not equal? Well, before I canceled stuff out, right, I want to figure out what would make this denominator 0. And you always want to find your excluded values in the equation that you had before you started canceling things out. The denominator cannot equal 0. So that means that x cannot be 5, x cannot be 0, and x cannot be negative 4. All right, let's try another one. Now in part B, they want us to divide the second element by the third element. So let's go ahead and divide the second element, minus 55x cubed over 11x cubed plus 44x squared. And I'm going to divide that by the third element, which is x squared minus 121 over 11x plus 121. Okay, now writing this in this way is fine. However, it will be easier if instead of writing it as dividing with the fraction bar, since we already have fractions, instead to use the division symbol like this. So instead of writing the second element over the third element to represent division, it would be better to write it with the division symbol. So here's the first element divided by, or the second element divided by the third element. Now it's more like what we would have with regular fractions, right? Like if I had 1/2 divided by 3 over 5, well, what I would do is I would keep the first fraction, and dividing any number is the same thing as multiplying the reciprocal. So I change the division to multiplication and I flip the second fraction. And then I could just multiply straight. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to change this division to multiplication, and I'll flip over this third element, and it will become 11x plus 121 over x squared minus 121. So I'm flipping it around and changing the division to multiplication. Now that it is multiplication, I could do just like I did before, multiply top times top over bottom times bottom. Again, this here, I want to factor the numerator and factor the denominator. So I could factor out an 11x cubed, and that would give me x minus 5. And here I could factor out 11, so these two are multiplying, and that would give me x plus 11. On the denominator, I could factor out 11x squared, which gives me x plus 4. And this two are multiplying on the bottom. And this is the difference of squares. So this will be factoring into x plus 12 times x minus 12. Oop, just kidding. 12 times 12 is 144. So 11 times 11 is 121. So this is x plus 11 times x minus 11. All right, now let's go in and cancel out any common factors, right? Now, actually, before I go ahead and do that, let's just write our excluded values. So x cannot equal 0, -4, -11, or +11. All right, now let's go ahead and cancel out. X plus 11 divided by x plus 11, 11 divided by 11, and 2 copies of x cancel with 2 copies of x here, but there were 3 copies of x in the numerator, so that's gonna still keep us with 1 copy of x in the numerator. So in the numerator, we have 11x times x minus 5, so we end up with 11x squared minus 55x. And in the denominator, we just have x plus 4 times x minus 11. So x times x is x squared. X times -11 would be -11x. 4 times x would be 4x, so -11 plus 4x is -7x. And 4 times -11 is -44. Okay. All right. Go ahead and pause the video and try number 2 on your own. Okay, so with this one, we're dividing the second by the first. So I'm taking this one and dividing it by this one. So essentially, I end up with 20y minus 180 over 6y squared minus 26y plus 20. And then I'm dividing this one. So essentially, I will change that to multiplication and flip this over. So it'll be multiplying 4y minus 16 over y squared minus 13y plus 36. Okay. So let's go in, and since this is multiplying, it'll just be top times top over bottom times bottom. Let's factor the numerator and denominator. So the numerator factor here would be 20 times y minus 9. And this is multiplying with 4y minus 16. I could factor out a 4, and we get y minus 4. In the denominator, I'm actually going to bring this over here on the side because I feel like that's going to take me a little bit of space to factor this one. So I'm just going to bring this over to factor it over here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is factor out a common factor of 2, a GCF of 2. So this will be 3y squared minus 13y plus 10. And now I can, oops, I should probably make that a square bracket since the other one's a square bracket. I can rainbow over 2 numbers that multiply to 30 and add to -13 would be -3 times -10, -3 plus -10. So if I break up the middle into -3y minus 10y, I can group to factor. 3y would factor out from these two, leaving me with y minus 1. I could factor out -10 from these two, which gives me y minus 1. And then I could factor out the y minus 1 from both, which would leave 3y for the first term and -10 for the second term. So that's how this one factors. 2 times y minus 1 times 3y minus 10. And then I'm multiplying times this trinomial. Now, what multiplies to 36 and adds to negative 13 would be negative 4 times negative 9 is 36, and negative 4 plus negative 9 is negative 13. But this coefficient is 1, so I don't have to break up the middle like I did here. This will just factor into y minus 4 times y minus 9. Okay. Now that we have it completely factored, let's cancel out any common factors. And again, before I forget, let me just write my excluded values. So the variable y, right, what value will make the denominator 0? Because that cannot be. So y cannot be 1, y cannot be 10 thirds, y cannot be 4, and y cannot be 9. Okay. Moving right along, we can cross out y minus 9 and y minus 4. We also have a factor of 2 here. 4 divided by 2 would be 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that cancels. So in the numerator, we just have 20. Oh, just kidding. 20 times 2. 2 was left there, so that's 40. And in the denominator, we have y minus 1 times 3y minus 10. Now, y minus 1 times 3y minus 10, I got that from here, which was just this trinomial. So the denominator is 3y squared minus 13y plus 10. And that's number 2. All right. Let's try some different operations. Let's try adding and subtracting, right? So on number 3, we want to add the second and the third. So we're adding 6u minus 3v over 8v. And we're adding that with the third element, which is 2u squared plus uv minus v, not u, plus uv minus v squared. And that's all over 3 times u minus v. So the denominator here is actually already factored. Okay, great. So when we're adding and subtracting fractions, we need a common denominator. And that's the same here with rational expressions, right? We need the denominator to be the same. So here I have a factor of 8 and v, and here I have a factor of 3 and u minus v. So in this fraction, I'm missing a factor of 8, and I'm missing a factor of v. And in this fraction, I'm missing a factor of 3, and I'm missing a factor of u minus v. Now the denominator of both fractions is u minus v times 3 times 8 times v. The numerator will be these two added together. So let's go ahead and write that out. So we have, let me extend this, this is going to get quite long. We have these two multiplied together plus these two multiplied together, right? Now, I will actually need to combine that in order to later factor it to see if any common factors cancel. So let's go ahead and multiply this out. So this will be 3u minus 3v, and I need to multiply that with 6u minus 3v. So 3u times 6u would be 18u squared. 3u times negative 3v is negative 9uv. Negative 3v times 6u is negative 18 uv, and negative 3v times negative 3v is positive 9v squared. Moving right along, we're adding this quantity, so we don't necessarily have to put it in parentheses because it's adding, so it won't change the sign. But if it was subtracting, then you need to put the second thing in parentheses so you could distribute the negative. But we're just adding here, so that's fine. And we're going to multiply 8v times all three of these terms. So 8v times 2u squared would be 16u squared v. 8v times uv would be 8uv squared. And 8v times negative v squared would be negative 8v cubed. All right. Let's go ahead and combine any like terms that we have. So I see UV and UV that I can combine. Oh, that's really dark. UV and UV that I could combine. I see, let's see, V squared, nope. Okay, so that's the only thing I can combine. Let's write it out. So I have 18, oops. I have 18 u squared, and then negative 9 minus 18 is negative 27 uv, and 9v squared, of course, is just 9v squared, and 16 u squared v is just 16u squared v. 8uv squared is just 8uv squared, and negative 8v cubed is just negative 8v cubed. Denominator is u minus v times 24v. So let me multiply that in. 24v times u would be 24uv, and 24v times negative v would be negative 24v squared. Now the reason why I went in and I multiplied that and I didn't factor the numerator is because there's no way that I could factor the numerator as it stands. So that's why I didn't do it. Now, there's one part of this that I have not written, which is the excluded values. So let's just go in quickly and do that. So the excluded values are v is a variable, and that cannot be 0. And I have another variable, u. U cannot equal v, because if both u and v are the same, then anything subtracted by itself would be 0, and then 0 times anything would make the denominator 0. So v cannot be 0, and u cannot be v. They cannot be the same value. Okay. Let's do one more, and then you can try some on your own. So we're taking the difference here, so we're subtracting the first and the second element. So I have u minus v over 8v minus 6u minus 3v. That almost looks like a u. Let me write that as 3v over 8v. Oh, great. So the denominator is already the same. We don't have to get it to be the same. We just have to subtract the numerator. So the denominator is already the same. It's 8v, so that stays the same for my result. And then now I just subtract the top. U minus v minus the quantity 6u minus 3v. Now remember, when you're subtracting here, you're subtracting all of the numerator of the second one. So because it's a negative, you'll have to distribute. Don't forget that piece, okay? Anytime you are subtracting, whatever comes after has to go in parentheses if it's more than one term, right? So really this is u minus v minus 6u plus 3v over 8v. So let's combine like terms. We can combine u minus 6u would be negative 5u, and negative b plus 3v is positive 2v. The denominator is 8 times v. Now the numerator we can't factor at all. Like if we could factor out a v from both of these, then I could cancel out v, but I can't factor that at all, so we're done. We just have to now state that v cannot be 0. All right. So go ahead and pause the video and try these 4 on your own. All right. So we're multiplying here the first and the third, and I would suggest fast forwarding just to see if you got these right, but come back if you get them wrong so you could see how to do the problems. If we're multiplying the first and the third, right, we would get 4x plus 64 over 8, and then you're multiplying that with the third expression, which is 8x minus 32 over 4x. So in order to multiply these, I can just multiply top times top over bottom times bottom. So essentially I have 4x plus 64, which would factor into 4 times x plus 16, and that's multiplying with 8x minus 32, which would factor into 8 times x minus 4. The denominator is just 8 times 4 times x, so that really can't factor any further except with the numbers, but they're just numbers, so we can leave them like that. And we can see 8 divided by 8 will cancel, 4 divided by 4 will cancel. So we end up with x minus 4 times x plus 6. Now if I multiply that in the numerator, I will get x squared plus 12x minus 64. And in the denominator, of course, is just x. Now what we canceled out were just numbers, not a variable. So really the only exclusion here is that x cannot be 0. All right. All right, let's move on to number 2. So on number 2, you're dividing the second by the fourth. So this is 8x squared plus 32x over x squared minus 16. And you're dividing that by the fourth one. So if you're dividing this, you're really multiplying the reciprocal, which would be 8x squared minus 32x over 4x. Okay, so now this is a multiplying, so top times top over bottom times bottom, basically same thing as before. Let's go ahead and factor the numerator as much as possible, which would factor, we could factor out 8x, that would give us x plus 4, and that's multiplying with this one, which would factor out 8x, and that gives us x minus 4. In the denominator, this is the difference of squares, so that would factor into x plus 4 times x minus 4. And of course that's multiplying with 4 times x, which would just be 4x. Now let's cancel. We have x plus 4 divided by x plus 4, x minus 4 divided by x minus 4. We have a copy of x that would cancel, and we have 8 divided by 4. So 8 divided by 4 is 2, 4 divided by 4 is 1, so that cancels. So we end up with 8x times 2 in the numerator, which is 16x. And in the denominator, we just have 1 remaining. Everything divided and canceled out. So really we just have 16x. Now I have a really bad habit of forgetting my excluded values, so don't forget your excluded values, and you get those before you cancel stuff out. So x cannot be negative 4, x cannot be positive 4, and x cannot be 0. Okie dokie. Moving on to number 3. We're adding the first and the fourth expression. So we're going to add 4x plus 64 over 8 with the fourth expression, which is 4x over 8x squared minus 32x. Okay, now for adding, remember you need a common denominator, right? So let's go ahead and factor this denominator to see if there's any common factor that we don't already have to multiply in. So if I factor out this denominator, it would be 8x times x minus 4. So we have a copy of 8 that is already on both, but for this first expression, we're missing x as a factor, and we're also missing x minus 4 as a factor. So we have to multiply that in. Now the denominator for both fractions is 8 times x minus 4, and the numerator we would just add, right? We're going to take all of this, multiply it together, and then add that with 4x. So let's multiply in first the x, so we have x squared minus 4x, and I'm going to take that binomial and multiply it with this binomial, which would give us 4x cubed plus 64x squared minus 16x squared minus 256x, and then we're adding that with 4x. Let me extend this fraction bar. Okay. So now let's go ahead and combine like terms. We can combine 64x squared minus 16x squared, and we can combine negative 256x plus 4x. So that gives us 4x cubed plus 48x squared minus 252x. The denominator, of course, is still the same. Okay, now we need to go in and see, is it possible to cancel out and simplify, right? Now, I can actually factor the numerator. I can factor the numerator by factoring out 4x, and that would leave me with x squared plus 12x minus 63. The denominator, of course, is the same. Now, if I try to factor out this trinomial, multiplies to negative 63 and adds to 12, there isn't anything. So this method doesn't work, which means that it cannot be factored. So this is as factored as it can get. So now that it's factored as much as possible, actually before I go ahead and cancel stuff out, let's go ahead and write the excluded values, because then I'll, again, forget those. So the excluded values, x cannot be 0, and x cannot be 4. Okay, now we can cancel out an x, and we can cancel out a factor of 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, 8 divided by 4 is 2. So we end up with the numerator is x squared plus 12x minus 63, and in the denominator we get x minus 4. Oh, times 2. So 2x minus 8. Almost forgot that. Be careful when you've factored out, don't forget to multiply everything that remains together. Okay, last one, subtracting the second and the fourth expression. So we're taking 8x squared plus 32x over x squared minus 16, and we're subtracting that with 4x over 8x squared minus 32x. Okay. Again, the best course of action here is to factor the denominator, because you're going to need the two denominators to be the same. So if we have common factors already, then we don't need to multiply that in as well. So this denominator is x plus 4 times x minus 4, and this denominator would factor into 8x times x minus 4. So you could see that the factor of x minus 4 is already on both, so we don't need to multiply that in. We just have to multiply this fraction by 8x and multiply this fraction by x plus 4. Now the denominator for both is the 8 times the x times x plus 4 times x minus 4. The numerator will be 8x times this quantity minus 4x times this quantity. So again, with subtraction, just be careful that subtraction will distribute to both of the expressions on the right. Okay, both of the terms on the right. So we end up with 64x cubed plus 8 times 32 is 256 x squared. And then we have the, again, you want to distribute the negative to both of those. So negative 4x times x would be negative 4x squared, and negative 4x times 4 would be negative 16x. All right, we can combine these two middle terms together. So we get 64x cubed plus 252x squared minus 16x. The denominator just stays the same for now. 8 times x plus 4 times x minus 4. Okay, now the important thing here is going to be, can we factor the numerator? If we can factor the numerator, then we can potentially cancel out common factors. So we could actually factor out a common factor of 4 from all three of these terms and a factor of x from all three of these terms. So we're going to factor out 4x from all three of the numerator terms. That would give us 16x squared plus 63x minus 4. And the denominator, of course, is the same for now. Now that I've grouped the two fractions, factored the top and the bottom as much as possible, let's go in with our final answer. First, what are the excluded values? X cannot be 0, because if this is 0, then 0 times all of this would be 0. And x cannot be negative 4, and x cannot be positive 4. Okay, canceling out now, x divided by x cancels. We can cancel out a factor of 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So in the numerator, we end up with, ooh, wait a minute. You know what I just thought about? I didn't try factoring this trinomial. So it might factor, and I'm already seeing what will factor here, because 16 times negative 4 is negative 64. So multiplies to negative 64 and adds to 63 would be negative 1 and 64. So this will factor. I'll do that work here on the side. So we have 16x squared plus 64x minus 1x minus 4. So factoring out 16, here we get 16x. We get x plus 4, and we can factor out here negative 1, and that will give us x plus 4, and then we can factor out x plus 4, which on this term would give us 16x, and on this term would be negative 1. So this actually factors. So let me go in and rewrite that. So this factors into x plus 4 times 16x minus 1. So now you could see that the x plus 4 also cancels. So that's why it's important to factor as much as possible because if there are common factors, you can actually cancel them out. So the numerator is 16x minus 1, and the denominator is x minus 4. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. See you guys next time.